afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We want to thank you for joining us today for our webinar with the Cross-Institutional Task Force who prepared ICCA Report number 8, which is going to be the subject of the webinar today. My name is Theomonique. I am one of 3 young ICCA co-chairs. My other co-chairs are Matthew Morrance and Panos Chalkias. And I am also joined this morning by 2 young ICCA events coordinators, Anna and Sharon, who will be moderating the session today. We are also joined by wonderful speakers, and those speakers include Carolyn Lamb, Jennifer Evers, and Carl Moreze Philippe, and Silvia Nuri. So I will be introducing those speakers in more detail in just a bit, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of how the webinar is going to be structured today. So first, Carolyn Lamb is going to give a brief overview of the ICCA report and introduce us to what the report is about, as she chaired the task force that prepared the report. And then we're going to go into a panel discussion on why gender diversity matters, the causes of the lack of diversity, and opportunities we have as young practitioners to address gender diversity in arbitral appointments. There is also going to be a presentation by Jennifer Evers on the data in relation to the causes of lack of diversity to show what we need to do, or rather the present statistics on how arbitral appointments or proceedings or how the arbitrators are appointed who are female. We are also going to take live questions, so if you can use the Q&A function for those questions, we'd really appreciate it, and that's going to happen more so towards the end. So as everyone knows, Young ICCA is an international network for young practitioners who are interested in arbitration. And we had to transition to a webinar series as opposed to our skills training workshops due to the present global pandemic. But turning back to the webinar, I'd like to give a brief introduction of each of our speakers. The panelists are Carolyn Lamb, who is a partner at White & Case LLP and distinguished faculty chair of the LLM program in international arbitration and visiting professor at the University of Miami. She is also the chair of International Arbitration Americas and of the American Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce. She's a member of the board of American Turkish Council and American Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. She's a member of ICCA Panel of Arbitrators, a member of the ICDR International List, the American Law Institute's Council and its Advisory Committee on Restatement on International Arbitration, and the U.S. member of the NAFTA 22 Committee. Jennifer Evers is a senior associate in international arbitration practice at White & Case LLP in Washington, D.C. She represents clients in high-stakes, complex international disputes arising under a range of investment treaties, contracts, and national investment laws, with an emphasis on disputes arising in Central Asia. Jennifer is a member of the Cross-Institutional Task Force on Gender Diversity in International Arbitral Appointments and Proceedings, and she's also actively involved in pro bono matters at her firm. She's previously worked at the Office of the Chief Counsel for International Commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she focuses on issues related to investment and export trade finance, among others. She received her JD from Georgetown University Law Center. We also have a last-minute addition to the panel because Michael Mikaroff was unavailable due to his work obligations. So we thank Kai for stepping in on such short notice. He is the Global Chief Litigation Counsel at GE Renewable Energy, and he's based in London. He attended the university, and please forgive this pronunciation if it's incorrect, of Tübingen, and graduated with a JD degree in 1997. He's lectured on civil, commercial, and corporate law at that same university, and he's also clerked at the Regional Court of Stuttgart. He is a member of the Frankfurt Bar and holds a PhD in commercial law from the University of Tübingen in Germany. He has past professional experience with the international law firm of Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen & Hamilton, based in Brussels, and he has experience with representing clients before the European courts and the European Commission. He joined General Electric in 2008 in Florence, and he was appointed the Global Chief Litigation Counsel for GE Renewable Energy in 2016. He is responsible for leading the policy initiatives aimed at managing and reducing the risk of dispute. So we're hoping today that he will be able to bring some balance to this panel and give a different perspective on the importance of gender diversity in arbitral appointments and proceedings. We are also joined by Mereze Philippe. She is a special counsel at the Secretariat of the ICC International Court of Arbitration. She is co-founder of Arbitral Women and also a board member. She is also a member of the steering committee of the Equal Representation in Arbitration Pledge. She's a member of the council of the ABA section of dispute resolution and of the ABA Online Dispute Resolution Task Force. She's also a member of the advisory board of Arbitry. She's a board member of the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. She's a fellow of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. She's a member of the editorial board of the International Journal of Online Dispute Resolution, and she's a member of the Paris Place d'Arbitrage. And Mereze was also a member of the Untitled Working Group 3 on ODR report, and that was delivered in February 2016, and has been a member of the ICCA Diversity Task Force that delivered this report that is the subject of the webinar this morning. She has received the CPR 2018 Diversity Award for Outstanding Contributions to Diversity in ADR. And finally, we are joined by Silvia Nuri. He's the head of Freshfields London International Arbitration Group and the head of the African Disputes Group. She's previously practiced in Paris and New York offices of Freshfields, and she specializes in commercial and investment treaty arbitrations, particularly in emerging markets. She has advocated before arbitral tribunals in both English and Spanish, and she has acted in major disputes in a variety of jurisdictions from South America to Africa to Eastern Europe. She has also has particular expertise in energy, natural resources, and telecom sectors, and she has held and holds positions and memberships in a variety of arbitral institutions, including the governing board of ICCA, the board of the SEC's Arbitration Institute, the advisory board of the ITA, and the Advisory Council of Africa Arbitration. She is the founder and co-chair of the Global Steering Committee of the Equal Representation Arbitration Pledge, and in 2019, she was included in the Heroes Global Top 100 Women Executives list. To each of the panelists today, I just want to thank you on behalf of Young ICCA for joining us and giving us some of your time to share and have conversation with young practitioners. We really appreciate this opportunity to listen to the persons who prepared such an important and seminal report, and we hope to have a good session today. So without further ado, Anna and Sharon, we can proceed with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you so much. Our first moment in this discussion will be to have a couple of words by Caroline, who has led research on this very important topic, and who we welcome now to take the floor and to take us away.
Just to say that Anna, it was a bit we couldn't hear everything you said, but we would like to invite Carolyn Lamb to give her introductory presentation, and then which will be followed by Jennifer Iver's presentation on data on gender diversity. Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and great to be with Young ICCA. You know, the extraordinary thing about the work of our cross-institutional task force is, number one, all of the people that came together to make this happen. And we had the participation of so many of the important arbitral institutions, bar associations, law firms, and the leaders from the Pledge and Arbitral Women. And of course, we are incredibly indebted to all of those who worked closely with us, like Nicola Pert, who's on the task force, and Jen Ivers, both of whom spent countless hours analyzing the data and pulling everything together. And the really important thing on slide 2, I think, you can see that what we've been able to do is to really analyze using the data from all of the various institutions and participants to look at what has the impact been of the focus of Arbitral Women and Maria's very important initiative started many years ago, and the pledge. And we've really been able to see an incredible increase in the number of women. Now, it doesn't come close to where we need to be, but you can see that focus and attention to the issue is important. I think in the task force, in the way we analyze the data, the information, the recommendations, we have touched on, of course, the importance of gender diversity, what it brings to international arbitration. We've examined, you'll see from some of Jen's documented figures, certainly the current trends and the appointments of female arbitrators, who's appointing them and who's not. Is it the clients? Is it the institutions who've made great progress? Or is it the co-arbitrators where we need to inspire more? There certainly remains a lack of complete diversity, and we examine a bit the causes of that, as well as some of the opportunities to address it and how. And why is it important? I think all of us know why it's important. Women have incredible talent, which shouldn't be ignored, and is a very important dynamic for the arbitral process, for the dispute resolution process. Gender diversity is certainly promoted and required under many of the international legal instruments from the UN, from treaties, from declarations, and other instruments. And they apply equally to demonstrating the legitimacy of the arbitral process in general for the parties as well as for the process itself. I think if you look at the historic progression of women's appointments from 1990 through 2019, you can see from the time when Merez began her efforts through when the pledge really began to come to the forefront and have some teeth, we've had a clear incline. Which is great. We're not where we should be, and one of the big things we did in working on this is to try to analyze why we see a lack of diversity and what we can do to improve it. We didn't want it to just be a complaint. We very much wanted it to be a roadmap going forward for what we can do to improve it. And I think we'll go back on slide 5, some of the causes. It's important to understand that we enumerate. Certainly unconscious bias is pervasive. We don't like to admit it, but it's there. Diversity, it's a low priority many times in the selection of an arbitrator. Aversion to first-time arbitrators. It's exceedingly difficult, and we all know who run big arbitrations, to sell someone to your client who has an incredibly important case to them, to sell someone that is not well known, who may not have a series of arbitrations they've led or served on the panel of, so that it's a challenge that we overcome with a number of our recommendations. And many times there's limited information on first-time arbitrators. You don't have other decisions they've made, other tribunals they've been involved in, other efforts they've led. And so you really do need to look at what can we do to really promote women and their capability. I think certainly what we've identified in the report, identifying and considering qualified women candidates, and there are so many now, whether it's GAR, whether it's Catherine Rogers, Arbitrator Initiative, etc., you can get women listed and out front in their capabilities out front. Sponsor diversity initiatives. The Pledge has done tremendous efforts in this regard, with featuring to various national arbitral institutions women who can meet with people and become known to promote themselves. Also, recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Difficult indeed, but you don't get anywhere by ignoring it. And so it is something to call to the attention in a diplomatic way when you're meeting with clients, when you're meeting with others, to promote women. Certainly mentoring and training women lawyers and promoting their visibility. It is tremendously important. Reflecting diversity in institutional panels and rosters, really helping women get on the panels and rosters and promoting them at the institutions. And you'll see from the statistics, now that we have so many great women-led institutions, we're really seeing many more appointments coming out of the institutions. Promoting transparency in arbitral appointments, requiring, this is hard, diversity in counsel teams and in arbitrator appointments. The heavy lift there falls to clients, of course, and to the institutions. Promoting a positive work culture and flexible arrangements to permit women to work in this area and excel through all phases of their life. So how does the international arbitral community do this? It really is, we focus on the young practitioners in our report, but we also look at some of the same modalities for already established practitioners. So how do we do it with the younger that we recommend in Part 3, Section 4 of the report? We encourage you to join arbitration associations, and especially their young committees, like Young ICCA. This is where you really make the contacts that will support you throughout your professional life. Seek out leadership opportunities. That's tremendously important, so that you can shine in leading some initiative on any committee, on anything, to be visible and build your network, to actively participate in trainings and conferences, in moots. There are constant opportunities that are coming up, and if someone doesn't open the door for you, call someone who's organizing them and volunteer. And you may start by volunteering in a small role, but as you demonstrate your abilities, you'll be called upon to do more. demonstrate your qualities as an arbitrator. Take small appointments. You know, you start small and you build in expertise. If you're in the National Association, in the AAA, in the Swiss Arbitration Association, in whatever, you can get small appointments, establish credentials, and move on. You, of course, need to be excellent in your first and in all subsequent appointments so that you really demonstrate why you are capable of a client putting their trust in you on a tribunal. Invest in relationships with arbitral institutions and identify mentors and sponsors. You need to work with people who are well established and who can help you and open doors for you. We really found that is one of the best ways for you to move forward. So the report itself both analyzes where we are, and it provides modalities and strategies for you to decide where you're going and how to get there. And I think that's why it's such a tremendous effort and report, and we are delighted that ICCA would publish it as one of its reports together with all of the institutions and individuals who you'll hear from today who supported its work. Jen can give you some of the data that we relied on.
Thank you, Carolyn. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So as Carolyn mentioned, my name is Jennifer Ivers. I'm an associate at White & Case. And today I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the data that we went through in our report. And let me just get to the next slide deck here. All right. So thank you to Young ICCA for inviting me to participate in this panel today. I'm thrilled to be here, and I was thrilled to be a member of the task force, as gender diversity and indeed diversity in general is a truly important issue for the international community. And before I go into the data itself, I just want to echo what Carolyn said about finding mentors and sponsors throughout your career. As a young practitioner, I have been so fortunate to have several wonderful mentors, including in particular Carolyn, who have really helped me in developing my skills as a lawyer and in advancing my career. So I would really emphasize that point in particular from the report. So going to the data, as Carolyn mentioned, one of the key objectives from the task force was to gather and publish data on female arbitrator appointments in arbitration. So as a baseline question, how did we obtain this data? Much of it was compiled by the arbitral institutions that also served as members of the task force. And you can see the full list of the institutions here, which include many of the most prominent and well-known institutions throughout the world. Other sources of data were publicly available, and these included data from the PCA and the CAS, as well as data compiled by the University of Oslo's Pluricourts Investment Treaty Arbitration Database. We also obtained data from Lucy Greenwood, an international arbitrator who has been focused on issues of gender diversity for many years now. So before we go into the data, I think it's important to recall a quote by the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said that women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. And yet, as you'll see in the data I'm about to discuss, and certainly historically, women have been, and even today remain, the exception in serving as arbitrators. You saw in the graph that Carolyn just showed you that women constituted less than 5% of all appointed arbitrators in every year prior to 2008. And while progress has been made since then, particularly in the last 5 years, we still have not reached gender equality in arbitrator appointments. So the task force looked at all data and in particular focused on the numbers from 2015 to 2019. Now, the data is extensively documented in the appendices of the report, where you'll find both the raw numbers and the percentages related to arbitrator appointments. So an abbreviated form of this data is shown on the table before you. It contains data from each of the individual institutions, as well as the overall average in that last row at the bottom. And in each of the data points, you have both the number of female arbitrator appointments and then the corresponding percentage of appointments for that institution. Now, because there are so many ways to analyze the data and different people view data in different ways, I wanted to show you this information as well in a graph form. So you can see more clearly in the graph here that the average percentage of female arbitrator appointments has risen at a relatively stable rate, from 12% in 2015 to 16% in 2017 and up to 21% in 2019. Now, the task force also broke down these percentages by institution. So you can still see the red dotted line is the overall average. And then on top of that red line, you can also see different colored lines for the various individual institutions and their average appointment of female arbitrators from 2015 to 2019. When you look at any particular institution, it may not be a standard increase throughout the years. And this is particularly true for institutions with a smaller number of appointments on an annual basis. And I think the Court of Arbitration for Sport is a good example of this variability due to smaller overall numbers. And you can see the CIS numbers in that black line at the bottom of the screen, with a drop in female appointments in 2017 and then that sharp increase in 2019. So you do get some variability, but on the whole, we've seen a pretty stable increase over the years. Now, as Carolyn mentioned, a key feature of the task force report is that it looks not solely at the overall numbers, but breaks those numbers down based on who is making the appointment: the institution, the co-arbitrators, and the parties. So first, taking a look at appointments by institutions. You can see on the slide here that over the last 5 years, institutions generally have appointed a far greater percentage of female arbitrators than the overall average. So the average percentage of female arbitrators appointed by the institutions has remained relatively constant in the early 30 percentile from 2015 to 2019. And as a general matter, individual institutions overall did pretty well in maintaining and even increasing relatively large percentages of female appointments during that time. And one other key point to this is that institutions have appointed more overall arbitrators as an overall number over the last 5 years. And thus, while the percentage of female appointments has remained fairly stable, the total number of female appointments has increased. So the LCIA, for example, is shown in the yellow line on the graph. And the LCIA appointed 55 women in 2015, but nearly doubled that number with 105 women in 2019. So while the percentages are stable, the overall number of women being appointed has gone up. Now, the next type of appointment that we looked at is appointments by co-arbitrators. And here we see that the average percentage of female appointments more than doubled, from 9.6% in 2015 to 21.5% in 2019. Now, one thing to note about co-arbitrator appointments, however, is that the total number of appointments made by co-arbitrators is substantially lower than the total number of appointments that are made by the institutions or the parties. And because the total number is lower, the data is much more variable. And you can see this when you look at the individual institutions and their data. So as you can see in any individual line, while there is a general increase overall from 2015 to 2019, there is greater variability on a year-by-year basis for each of the individual institutions. And finally, looking at the appointment of female arbitrators made by the parties. So the good news on this front is that there has been a slight increase in the overall percentage of female appointments by the parties, rising from 8.5% in 2015 to nearly 14% in 2019. So while the increase is a very good thing, these numbers do remain much lower than the overall percentage of female arbitrators that have been appointed, especially when you compare it to appointments by the institutions. And looking at the next slide here, we see a good amount of variability in appointments within each institution by the parties over the years. So it has been a general increase, but because many of the attendees of this webinar serve as counsel and drive much of the appointment process, and as Carolyn mentioned, I think it's important to flag here that counsel have a really good opportunity to make a difference in promoting gender diversity in international arbitration through the arbitral appointment process. So certainly something to keep in mind. And then finally, just to wrap up, this is a graph showing much of the data that we just looked at, just in a different form. It's a graph of the data from 2019 and really shows where we are right now. So the red line is the overall average percentage of female appointments, 21.9% in 2019. And then you can see the data for each institution broken down by appointments by the parties in blue, appointments by the institutions, which, as I mentioned, are generally the highest. Those are in green. And then appointments by the co-arbitrators in yellow. So as Carolyn mentioned, and as is highlighted in the report, the institutions are really driving much of the gender diversity in arbitration. And that leaves a really great opportunity for the parties and for clients and for co-arbitrators to really increase the gender diversity that we see throughout the international arbitration community. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sharon and Anna, and thank you so much for having me on the panel, and I really look forward to hearing from the panelists on their views.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much, Caroline, for your great presentations. Now we should move to the panel discussions by Mirez, Silvia Nuri, and Kai-Uwe Karl. One of the main topics of today's webinar is why does diversity in arbitral tribunals matter? Can we hear first preliminary comments from Mirez, then Silvia, and then Karl? The floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. I think that the ICCA report is an outstanding tool that anyone should have, any individual, firm, organization should have handy, because it contains a wealth of information, data, and recommendations. So we will speak to that today, in addition to all the important information that Caroline and Jennifer has so far provided. And thank you very much, Caroline, for also inviting us to this excellent task force. I think that the short answer first is that, yes, talents are equally strong for both genders and for all profiles of human beings, and gender diversity matters. Talents are not a privilege of one kind. They exist in all profiles of human beings, women and men, young and older generations, ethnic communities, people with physical disabilities, and so on. So diversity is not only an issue of fairness and of human rights. I think it is important to note that using available talents and thus privileging diversity is important for the economic performance of companies and also of a nation, not only of companies. It should be part of a business plan. When firms have no inclusiveness programs, they are wasting talents. From the marketing perspective, diversity gives better exposure and attracts more clients who see that the firm is open-minded and brings the best expertise to serve the clients. And from the communication perspective, it allows clients to communicate with lawyers who have similar profiles to them. And according, you may know, to a McKinsey report, firms who have no females in lead positions perform less good. That's also important, and it's important, and an important measured information that can be shared in order to explain why diversity is so important. And I think that everyone bears a responsibility in cultivating diversity. all stakeholders in the business and the legal communities should help the society understand the costs of gender bias and how it would benefit from gender equality. This leads me naturally to the second answer. Yes, diversity on arbitral tribunals matters because both women and men bring different perspectives. Appointing women and men naturally reflects the components of the society and should allow bringing to the table various expertise also. In a Kluwer blog a few years ago, Joseph Mamounas raised interesting points following the ICCA Congress in Miami in 2014. And I think that Silvia was there because I understand that this is where also the idea of the pledge was born. He wrote that a lack of pluralism is a denial to users. So a lack of pluralism is a denial to users. He also quoted Benjamin Franklin, who said, if everyone is thinking alike, then no one is thinking. Therefore, diversity really matters. I believe that this summarizes very well the need for diversity, which may help improve the legitimacy of international arbitration. Also, gender and ethnic diversity were viewed as being one needed improvement in international arbitration, according to Queen Mary survey of 2017. Now, speaking about the ICC perspective, the ICC Court has committed in the recent years to being more proactive regarding gender diversity and diversity in general also. It has achieved a lot and continues to be fully engaged in diversity. First, the ICC is a signatory of the ERA Pledge and has signed the ERA Pledge from the inception in 2016. As you may know, the court has achieved gender parity in 2018. This was a historical moment. The number of women in managing positions at the Secretariat of the Court now outnumber men, which is also another factor of improvement in terms of representation of female talents on the Secretariat of the Court. It is also important to note that the ICC Court has issued a note to national committees on proposal of arbitrators, and the Court particularly insists on two issues. First, on gender diversity within the nomination commissions in charge of proposing arbitrators, and that such nomination commissions reflect generational and gender diversity, as well as various components of the local arbitration community. And second, the court insists on gender diversity in the proposal of arbitrators made by the nomination commissions. They should therefore make best efforts to achieve and maintain gender parity in their nomination commissions and favor gender diversity in the proposals they make. So I think this has also allowed a better number of women proposed for appointments by the court. Like most of the dispute resolution organizations, and I think also thanks to the pledge, where one of the criteria for advancing the promotion of women is to publish statistics in order to measure progress and to assess how far we are going each year. Most of the dispute resolution organizations today publish statistics on gender diversity, which was never heard of in the past. So it's only quite recent. We need to keep that in mind because I think that young generation, take this for granted, but it is not that granted. All these changes are quite recent, and we hope that change will continue going forward and in a faster path than so far and in the last 2 to 3 decades. I have personally seen a significant change since I started publishing statistics on ICC gender diversity around 2010. The percentage of female arbitrators rose from 7% in 2010 to 21% in 2019. And when you think that 10 years ago, the percentage was only at 7%, and this is not only the ICC, it's all across the board, that is quite low, but things have tremendously changed. So this is a visible progress, although we all know that more progress is needed to which all stakeholders should contribute. Conference panels also. Women are present on all panels, including on webinars. Parity is often achieved on the panels organized by the ICC Court. It's the same also with the Young Arbitrators Forum's representative. Parity is there. Parity is likewise achieved on the editorial board of the Bulletin of the Court. And last year, we achieved another historical moment. A woman was appointed at the head of the Commission on Arbitration and ADR. So the ICC efforts are also focused on generational diversity. The average age of women now, women and men actually, is now 50 years, which is younger than in the past. And 20% also of women and men playing the role of arbitrators are under 40. So we can see also generational diversity here. With respect to regional diversity, a breakdown is provided every year with the annual statistics, and we can see that all regions and countries are represented. We also have staff-driven initiatives at the ICC called World Business Women, intended to promote gender diversity throughout the ICC and the ICC national committees, policy commissions, and so on. So in the recent years, diversity and inclusiveness have been the center stage of discussions across all communities and organizations. We have observed a significant change, but I hope now that we will go faster in moving forward and getting to, hopefully, a certain parity in the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirez. Can we hear from Silvia Nuri on this topic? Why does diversity in arbitral tribunals matter? And we also have received a number of questions from our participants, and one of them is, do you ever advise your clients on importance of gender diversity? If you could comment on that as well. Thank you. And after Silvia, please, Kai, you also give your comments on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I just echo the comments of Carolyn and Mirez about the report. It's a wonderful report, and also about young ICCA and what a great job you're doing. I've recently joined, as Carolyn knows, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the ICCA governing board, and had a look at some of the statistics that ICCA itself has around diversity. And one of the most pleasing things is to see how diverse young ICCA is. What a great job the young generation is doing at diversity. I fear the older generation, of which I sadly include myself these days, has not done such a great job, although I think we have been trying very hard to change things. So in terms of my own perspective on gender diversity, I guess mine is a tale of 2 decades. And the first decade in which I was practicing, I qualified in 2000 and moved into the world of international arbitration. It really was a very undiverse world. And I really only, I think, started to do something about it in the second decade of my practice. And out of that came the idea for the pledge. And the reason, 3 reasons, I think, why diversity became so important to me. The first and foremost is the one that Mirez has stressed, and that is really wasted talent. I was really shocked when I first started looking into the statistics. I think the first decade of my practice, I almost didn't notice. I mean, that sounds very strange, but I didn't notice how dominated by men the world of arbitration was. I thought it was normal that every time I went in front of a tribunal, there were 3 men. I think I myself was perhaps beholden to Stockholm syndrome, or whatever you'd like to call it, unconscious bias, and thought this was completely normal, that there were only ever men at conferences speaking and the like. And then I would say it was probably about 9 years ago I started to have conversations with people when I was made a partner and assumed a leadership role about how this shouldn't be normal and how this wasn't right. And when I looked into the statistics, I realized that the 2 worlds I had been operating in, one is the investment treaty world, where, of course, these are highly politicized disputes of enormous profile and value. And then also the London arbitration world, which is dominated by QCs. Those were 2 areas where men had been historically dominant. And looking at the figures, Susan Frank did a study, I think back in 2012, of all the investment treaty awards up until that time, and found out that only 3.6%, I think it was, of the arbitrators appointed were men. So that was the world of ISDS. And then in the world of the London arbitration market. It was what really spurred me on. I think I moved back to London and I saw these lists being circulated. People would get in touch and say, we have a London dispute, can you name, give me a list of a few QCs? And every list of a few QCs was a list of men. And then when I looked at the numbers, and here just in terms of the numbers we have as partners in law firms and as female QCs, we'll come on later, I think, to talk about pipeline leak and the fact that those percentages themselves are not acceptable. But talking about percentages of, say, up to 20% in equity partners in law firms and probably a bit less than that in female QCs, the stats were showing that we weren't even appointing that percentage of women. So to me, it wasn't even about pipeline leak or the broader gender issue. There was a real barrier to getting women on tribunals from the pool that already existed. And that's why I started the pledge, because I saw that this was a tremendous gap between the women who clearly had the talents, even before going beyond the obvious candidates of badges of partnership in QCs, the women who clearly had the badge of quality and who weren't getting appointed. And that's where the pledge was started. So for me, I guess as a private practitioner, it's all very client focused. And I began to realize that I was doing my clients a disservice by not providing to them lists of the best quality possible arbitrators. And it's just obvious, really. If you give your client a list of 10 men, you are choosing from a pool of, let's say, 20 men, then the 10 men, you're going to get to the man who is half as good as the others. If you choose from your list of 10 from 20 women and 20 men, you are going to get a higher quality. It's just a simple question of maths. So I realized we weren't putting in front of our clients lists of the highest quality we could be. And so the pledge really was about a number of things. Miraz has mentioned some in terms of publishing statistics, but it went down to the very basics of giving women more visibility, getting them on more lists, getting them on more rosters, putting them in front of clients, because I do believe that we have the responsibility to put those lists to clients, just as hopefully now I think clients are finding that they have a responsibility to say to their law firms, if they don't, well, where are the women? Not necessarily to go and find the women themselves, because the law firms are supposed to go out and get those lists or look at those candidates, but where are the women? Please give me more. The institutions, I think, have been better at that, because the institutions, I think, see the bigger pools. They see more candidates. They have more visibility over the market. They've seen who has made a good arbitrator, a bad arbitrator. But we all need to do our bit. And that leads me to the second point, and that is legitimacy. Because looking back at that first decade of my practice, where I didn't come in front of one single female arbitrator, I just realized how wrong that was. And in the world of investment treaty arbitration, where immensely important, in some ways, political decisions are being taken, how do we feel when we look at our parliament or our senate or our whatever it is, and see a bunch of men making the law for us? It doesn't make us feel good. And from my perspective, it is not good that the men are all making the law in ISDS or whatever else it should be. And then finally, a question of fairness. It certainly isn't fair, particularly given the talented women who are out there, that it is the men who are occupying all the arbitral slots. So I went from studying this before I set up the pledge and seeing that the average was about 10% of women on tribunals, to the very happier state we are in today, where we're looking at about 20% of women on tribunals. The numbers are getting better. There's still a lot of room for improvement. But what I can say today is, at least I think we have reached the level where those women who have the badges, the stamps of partnership, of QCs, etc., are at least being appointed. We need to do better than that, because of course there are plenty of talented women who don't have that badge, and a lot of what Young ICCA is about is helping those who don't have that badge to succeed. But at least we seem to be at a place where even those who men have absolutely no excuse not to appoint are at least now getting their noses onto tribunals.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Kai, would you like to comment on this topic? What are the causes of a lack of diversity?
Thank you for inviting me and having me here, on very short notice. I'm very happy to participate in the discussion here. There's probably not much I can add to what Miraz and Silvia already said. I mean, diversity makes inherent sense. There's no debate around it. For all the reasons that were mentioned, let me add one small little point to it. And I think it's just more fun. It's more fun to work with diverse team than, when everyone looks kind of the same as you do. And that makes a difference. I think if I look kind of from a I guess, company lawyer perspective at the legal market, I think the situation is improving. At the same time, the legal market is there's a lot of protectionism, if you want to use international trade terms, right? It's a closed market where people who are inside, who get jobs, they want to keep it, many want to keep it as small as possible. And the situation is improving, I'm sure, but there is still this reaction that there is a lot of protectionism, really. And from the way I look at it, my task is to break this open. I have, if for example, if I get, and that happened, a proposal from a law firm, with 5 candidates as a chairperson on arbitration or a party, nominated arbitrator, and they all look the same. And they all look exactly the same as the law firm partner proposing them. Then to us, that's a reason. Clearly, we'll not even entertain the list, but it's also a reason to disqualify the lawyer, himself. It's just not something we'd like to see, and it shows a very closed and a very small mindset. And from our perspective, to get quality, to have competition, simply you need to break the market open. So that's, and I think lawyers are unfortunately very conservative folks. So you see that you see the law firms moving much slower compared, I think, to companies, for example. I think companies are more dynamic in that sense. We have, what we see is a lot of law firms focusing on diversity and coming across and showcasing, their diverse pool of lawyers. Still, I think it's very often that they play, lip service to it, and it's not really, it's more kind of a marketing tool where they know if they come and talk to us about diversity, that companies like to hear that, but I think there's still a bit of a way to go to really get to diversity, and that it also then not only is something that is showcase a team of associates and partner, and then when the case moves forward, they switch the teams. So I think there's still some way to go. Maybe the final point from our perspective, we get very involved in nominating arbitrator. We do that mostly ourselves. So we discuss within the company. We come up with our own lists, and we, I think we've been looking into our statistics in terms of nominating arbitrator, and I think in terms of, and we had a recent discussion. That's why I have the number in my mind. I think in terms of nominating arbitrator, we were way above 50% for female arbitrators. I think it was more in the neighborhood of 70% of the arbitrators we nominated in the last, I think, 12 to 18 months. Those are, it's one company and it's a relatively small number, but it is certainly something where we pay a lot of attention as a company in what we do.
Thank you very much. One more question on my part. Has the attitude toward women in international arbitration improved during your career? Can we hear from Silvia, and then Mirez, and then Kai? Thank you very much.
It has changed a lot in the last 20 years is all I can say. I think I alluded to that when I made my preliminary observations. I think it was completely normal, as I said, 10 years ago, to see all male tribunals. People didn't even remark on it. Now people still remark on all-female tribunals. I'd love to get to the stage where people don't remark on that anymore. You get people saying, "Oh, how nice, a panel of all women," or lady arbitrators, as they're called, which drives me slightly nuts. But it has changed tremendously, and I think a lot of it is awareness. I think there was some discrimination. I think there was a lot more unconscious bias. There remains unconscious bias. I think there is less discrimination. and I think things are changing, and the awareness really, and it's wonderful to hear from Kai actually, to hear the way he has described his view and his company's view, not only to the lists they get, but also to doing their own research and the number of females being appointed. You just didn't hear that kind of thing 10 years ago. And I think people just they genuinely weren't aware. And the problem, of course, with tribunals is that there is no one out there regulating. Before people started publishing, no one even knew what the stats were. There's no one out there like with judges where, you have a regulator in a sense who's looking at the composition of the various judges on the bench. Nobody is doing that. So each person thinks they're appointing one arbitrator, and so it doesn't really matter. It's a one-person job, and so, well, we appoint a man. It's a one-off. Does it matter? But obviously, when everyone does that in succession, then that's the problem. So I think awareness is the key thing that has changed in this decade, and really it's changed tremendously.
Thank you very much. Mirez, the floor is yours.
I agree, and I echo Silvia's comment that it's much better now. I think that we still have a long way to go, but I hope, again, that it's going to require only a few more years and not as long as we have experienced in the last 2 to 3 decades. The lack of diversity is unfortunately a long time heritage, and it was time that we address it again. And I say again because according to a research conducted by Susanna Ho and Derek Roebuck, published in a book on women in disputes, women used to arbitrate and mediate, and were very successful. And the book speaks about history going back to 4,000 years. So it's not recent. And every time women were successful and reputed, they were prevented from continuing to practice by lords or by the church or by other powers in place. So you may sometimes wonder, and I think this is something that was raised a few minutes ago, you may sometimes wonder whether discrimination against women is a matter of unconscious bias, of conscious bias, or a fear to lose and share power. And this is, again, you spoke, I think, Carl, about a small club and about concentrating the power within a small group. I think that it's probably a combination of all, and the fear of losing power is also one of them. So most of the causes can be overcome with working on unconscious biases, and today we have a lot of tools to help us recognize them and overcome them, such as the Arbitral Women Diversity Toolkit, such as calling on psychologists to come and train people in their firms. The ICCA report gives a lot of tips and recommendations also, which are very helpful. Another issue that we need to fight, I think, is 100% lineup of male speakers on panels. So the manuals, unfortunately, still come up quite frequently. It is not that infrequent. We need to call that out. We need to speak with the organizers. Sometimes the organizers don't realize what they're doing, and this happens to us very often because Arbitral Women has been calling on events organizers to call out that issue and say that that cannot work. Sometimes the answer given to us is, oh, but we didn't find any female speakers, which is not very serious because today there are so many directories online and there are so many organizations that you can call on. I mean, I think anyone is happy to help. And if you go to the Pledge website, you have a search page to help you find arbitrators. But on the search page, you also have a list of organizations and websites that provide lists of female practitioners, which can be very helpful. So I think that today, alleging that we didn't find any women, potential women speakers, arbitrators, mediators cannot be serious. We need to call out these issues very nicely, but firmly, without arrogance, without aggressivity, but just by, raising awareness every time with the organizers who may simply not pay attention to that. But I think it's important to do it because we still see it very often. Retaining lawyers is also important, and you do that by putting in place programs. One thing that I mentioned yesterday on a podcast, which I think was very important, is the fact that from every misfortune, positive aspects may come up. And the positive aspect from the pandemic and the lockdown, what I think really to prove to the world that women can continue working and be very efficient, either working from their office or working remotely. And this hopefully is going to help people, clients, law firms understand that women can care for their children, that they can spend time at home while working efficiently. So there are many things that we can do to fight discrimination, to fight unconscious bias, and to use talents again instead of wasting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirez. Kai, do you think the attitude toward women has changed, improved during your career?
Look, I think I can echo what Mirez and Silvia says. From my perspective, it is very easy to find just great talent and female arbitrators. It's just absolutely, it's not that I sit there and think, look, I'd like to kind of take into account, diversity, and now I really have to find someone good, and it's a hard one. It's just not the case. There's so many absolutely great women arbitrators out there that it's a non-issue from that perspective. Although I would say that, of course, I'm with a large company and I'm specialized in dispute resolution. That's what I do, day in, day out, right? That's my life. And I think it's different for colleagues of mine sitting in smaller companies who are generalists and do everything. And then, of course, they're not as plugged in the market. And then, it still can be an issue. And that's why, and this what was said here before, transparency is such an important issue, creating transparency. And I think especially in terms of the audience on this call, kind of the young professional trying to get into the market, transparency is what you need. You need to break open the market. What I was saying earlier, you have people who have an economic interest in keeping the market small, because that's how they make their money. They don't have an interest in transparency, and I think that needs to change, right? We all benefit from being able to find information, get information on arbitrators, on their style of arbitration. As much information as possible makes it much easier to nominate people, and will certainly help in terms of getting a much more diverse group of arbitrators, but beyond arbitrators also of outside counsel. I think that's equally important to, you cannot limit the question of diversity to tribunals. From my perspective, the starting point is, if I hire outside lawyer, it needs to be diverse also on the side of the law firm. And then you come, to the tribunal in the next step, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Now I pass the floor to my colleague Anna to continue with the rest of the questions.
Thank you, Sharon. So as time begins to be limited, I'm going to try to incorporate some of the questions that we have received in our Q&A into this last portion of opportunities to address gender diversity. And I'll start on one side. So what can young female practitioners, how can they promote gender diversity in the younger arbitration community? And let me direct this question at the moment to Silvia and ask another question, so 2 in 1. But specifically, we received the question that asked, at what stage of one's career should an arbitration lawyer realistically start seeking out arbitration appointments? And would this answer differ depending on whether we are talking about investment or commercial arbitration?
On your first question, what can young practitioners do to promote diversity? I think this goes to the point that Kai just made, which is, obviously diversity extends a lot beyond just women on tribunals. That was what the pledge focused on, because that was, I think, a sort of real screaming problem in our community. But gender diversity is across the board. And I think what young ICCA and young women and young men can do to promote diversity really is to do the kind of thing that you are doing now, and that is to be active I think that the main thing that I found with diversity is that you can't wait for someone else to make it happen. You have to make it happen yourself. We all have, especially in the arbitration community, where, as I say, there's no regulator, there's no supervisory body, there's no one looking after us. We have to do it ourselves. Every individual in this community can make it happen in their own way. So, you know, I had my own way of trying to make things happen. Every one of you will have your own way. As for promoting yourself as a young woman, the ICCA report has a very, very good list of things that you can do. I think Carolyn mentioned most of them already. It's obvious stuff such as invest in relationships, network, talk to people. Joining Young ICCA obviously is a very good thing to do. Sign up with your local institutions. All of you will have a local arbitral institution that you can sign up with. Go to conferences. Be visible. What we found with the pledge really was it's about visibility, and that you know that goes for anything, not just for getting your first appointment. It also goes for succeeding as a practitioner. So, you know, if your aim is to become a partner in a law firm, if your aim is to set up your own law firm, if your aim is to excel in-house, whichever way you want to do it, being visible is a good way of doing it. But equally, you know, being, and Carolyn mentioned this as well, you know, when you do something, just do it well. It's an obvious thing to say, but don't be complacent. And there is so much competition these days. I think there was, you know, in some ways less when I started out in the world. Maybe there was, you know, there were fewer women doing it, and maybe that helped me. I don't know. Today there is so much competition. I do feel for young people in the world of arbitration. So don't be complacent. Be brilliant, and be brilliant in a visible way. But more than anything, just have a can-do attitude. And I think that's what got me where I got to. And I said yes to everything. I tried everything. Never think that you can't do it. Don't think the person next to you can do it better. That usually is not true. Believe in yourself and just go out and get what you want to get, because no one else is going to do it for you. And to your second question, which was, if I remember correctly, when is the right time to be an arbitrator in commercial and investor state cases? I would say that is intensely individual. I've been asked the same question about when is the right time to have children, and frankly the two are the same in my view. It's entirely individualistic. You know, you might want to first be an arbitrator and not have children. You might want to have children and then be an arbitrator. You might want to do both at the same time. You might want to do neither. I personally wanted to do both, but I focused first on my family. And that's when I joined the task force, one of the comments that I made, and this doesn't apply to everybody because I know women who, you know, have sat as arbitrators while on maternity leave. My personal position was that I wanted to focus on having a family, and especially in the kind of big ticket cases that I have. I thought disappearing off on maternity leave, you know, in the middle of being an arbitrator wasn't something I wanted to do. And I, you know, the consequence of that is I pushed back getting my first appointment. It wasn't until last year that I made it known that I wanted to be appointed, and I now have my first arbitral appointment, and that was at the age of 44. A lot of women want to start sooner, and you certainly can. I would say in the ISDS space, you're not really going to start much sooner than 44, unless you manage to find a very small value claim. But in the commercial space, you certainly can. And I think I got my first invitation or solicitation of interest in the commercial space when I was a lot younger. Then I had the problem of conflicts, and that's an entirely different question. But to cut a long story short, I'd say it is entirely up to the individual when they want to start. People do start in their early 30s. I think it's not unknown for people to start in their late 20s. But what I would say is don't push to start too soon. It's not a race. You know, be certain that you are ready, that it's something that you want, it's something you have the capacity for, the availability for, and that way, when you get your first appointment, you can make sure you do it brilliantly, rather than not. So that's the advice I would give.
Thank you, Silvia. Another question that we received, and I direct this to Kai, is specifically, what advice would you give other in-house lawyers on how to bridge the gap in relation to gender diversity? So what would you tell a fellow young in-house lawyer on what he can do? You've mentioned a couple of things, but you know, what else would you advise on this, being it both, you know, female and of course male?
I don't know. I mean, I can, if I look at my own company, there is a lot of focus on diversity. So if I look at the legal department I'm in, you know, my boss, the general counsel, is Alison Clark. If I look at the team we have, you know, in terms of the direct reports and the broader legal team, I think it's a fairly balanced team in terms of, gender diversity and also racial diversity. So it's kind of, in a sense, well, let me put it this way: if I compare companies, the company I know with, law firms, I think companies seem to be more advanced. And I'm saying that also with a very narrow view, because I know one company very well, but I of course don't know the broader world. But I've seen, in GE, a lot of focus on diversity for a long period of time. It seems to be part of the DNA of the company, which is very good and which makes for a good team. So it's kind of more difficult for me to give tips in terms of what people should do, other than what Silvia was already mentioning. Going out there saying yes. If you're asked for to a challenging assignment, say yes, do it, right? Get into it. Be energetic. You'll get it done. I think you need to go out there, to do stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Kai. It's I'll just flag it. We won't have time to raise it, but we did get a question on why we are focusing on one type of diversity, whereas there are other types of diversity that matter. I'll just flag this for now. I think it's something that is relevant, and inclusion goes all ways, so to speak. I have one question now to Mirez, and it was a question that was put to us also today. And it is a reply to Mirez's call against manels. And so the question we got was, essentially for organizers or other men that are invited to speak in panels, what is more prudent? Is it prudent perhaps to commit to not to serve on a manel, for example? How can they go about that kind of experience, and what is the advice you have for this in these kinds of circumstances?
So what we have so far done, and Lorraine Brennan has started that almost 10 years ago, regarding calling out on events organizer, is simply telling them very kindly, we will not publicize, we will not promote your event, we will not participate to this event. We will certainly do it if next time you have women on the panels, and we are very happy to help you find speakers on the panels. So you can do it in a nice way, and whenever you learn about organizing an event, then try to be proactive. So what we do sometimes, we work with a lot of organizations, we have partnerships. Whenever we have a partnership, people know that they need to have women on the panels. But I don't think we should shy away from speaking up nicely, but still draw the attention of the organizers to the fact that these things should change.
Thank you, Mirez. I think we have all tried to cover as many questions as possible today. I will just flag a comment that we received regarding the data that we just saw, that Jennifer provided to us, and essentially saying, if you consider that for the last 5 years, there was an increase of approximately 5% in female arbitrator appointments, doesn't it show that we need to take more direct measures to ensure diversity in international arbitration? And I end this session, this panel discussion with a question, but this is exactly the kind of event that is trying to directly address this issue and bring awareness, and provide some useful tips for younger practitioners who want to thrive and who want to have a seat at the table and be in the room where it happens. And so we thank you for providing us with this much very relevant insight. And I now give the floor to Theo for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Anna. I just want to say thank you to each of the panelists. It's always a good indication of how a webinar has gone where we are tight for time, because there is so much room for a discussion on such a timely topic. And I think that we covered as much ground as possible. And I would want to thank Sharon and Anna for doing such a great job moderating the topics as we went through. Again, thank you to the panelists. And I also want to thank the steering committee of this event, who I did not mention at the beginning, but I would want to mention now. The steering committee composed of myself, Panos, who's one of the co-chairs, Matthew, another one of the co-chairs, the Young ICCA events coordinators, Anna and Sharon, and the task force members, Nicola Peart, who's on the call, and Jennifer Evers, who would have presented the data to you during one of the panel discussions. Thank you to each of you for helping to organize this webinar and keep everything moving as smoothly as possible. We really appreciate it. And I would, again, thank you all for joining us this morning. Most of the participants stayed on for the entire time, which is really good. And we're really appreciative of your continued support of Young ICCA. If you are interested in any more webinars, we do have another webinar coming up this week. It's in conversation with Professor Dr. Mohammed Abdel Wahab, and that is on the 8th of October. There is still time to register for it, so you can visit our events page. And we also have a webinar coming up on the 23rd of October, How to Work Effectively with Local Counsel, In-House Counsel, Fact Witnesses, and Experts. We do have more on the schedule for November and December, but they have not been published yet. But please continue to watch the Young ICCA events page. And again, on behalf of Young ICCA, we want to thank everyone for participating in today's gender diversity webinar. So have a good day.